Have you ever been listening to a debate in committee on energy issues or a debate on the floor and thought to yourself, I think I'm just missing something fundamental about what's happening here. I'd love to get more involved, but I don't know some of these basic terms. Well, we are here to try and answer that question and answer some of those questions that you might not have been comfortable asking, but could really use the answers to. I'm Jamie DeMarco. I'm the Maryland Director of the Chesapeake Climate Action Network, and I'm here with Delegate Lorig Charkoudian.
Hi there.
Hi. Today, we are going to be tackling the specific issue of what is a REC, a Renewable Energy Credit, around which our entire clean energy system is built in Maryland. It can be very confusing what it is. You might not be comfortable asking your colleagues what is a REC, but we're here to give you the full detailed description. And
so, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah. You know,
it's a complex issue. There's some things that are good about it, and some things we would like to change, and we're going to get at all of it.
And that's why we have brilliant legislative bodies to improve upon policy.
Yep.
So, my first question for you is to set the stage of why a REC is so important. Is when we say the Clean Energy Jobs Act in Maryland requires Maryland to have 50% clean electricity by 2030. What exactly are we saying, and what does that mean?
You know what? I'm going to back up even further.
Okay, great.
All right?
Back up the
there's
farthest.
a really important fundamental baseline that we got to start with whenever we're talking about different policies that could be subsidies for clean energy. And the place we have to start is by identifying and acknowledging the huge number of subsidies that have been going to fossil fuel industry and continue to go to fossil fuel industry for over the course of 100 years. So over the course of more than 100 years, we have subsidized the fossil fuel industry. We've subsidized with direct subsidies, with tax credits, federal, state. We've subsidized with indemnification, not holding them fully liable for the impact of the insurance that they might need. We've subsidized with access to federal lands at prices that are way below what a market price would be. We've subsidized with access to state lands at prices below market prices. We've subsidized, and those are all, everything I've said so far, and I could go on, are the direct subsidies. In addition to that, there is the massive indirect subsidy of fossil fuel companies not paying for the damage that they cause to our health and to our climate. And when we factor that in, it's billions and billions and billions of dollars that we've been subsidizing the fossil fuels companies at. But I think it's important to know, because sometimes people think when we talk about subsidies to fossil fuel companies, they think we're only talking about not charging them for what they did to the climate and to our health. That's an important part of the subsidy, but there's billions of dollars of subsidies that are direct to the fossil fuel companies that is not even getting to that part. And the reason that that's really important as the baseline before we start talking about clean energy is that a lot of times we'll have people say, why do we need to subsidize clean energy? Why can't it just compete in the market? Well, for one, it's a new and emerging industry, and any new and emerging industry generally gets some level of subsidy. Especially in the energy world, almost every electron is subsidized in one way or another. But specifically, because this new clean energy is going to now compete with an energy that's been here for 100 years and has been being subsidized and continues to be subsidized, it's unrealistic to think that the new clean energy is going to come on and just compete in the market with no subsidy. So that's a really important baseline. Once we've established that baseline, we can talk about what are the preferable ways to subsidize, what are the preferable ways to direct funds, to direct policy, to even that playing field that is now uneven, biased towards fossil fuels. But we've got to get that baseline in place, because otherwise people would be asking what would be a legitimate question, like why do we need to subsidize it to begin with? So wanted to start there.
That's great preface. Yeah, it's this myth that energy has ever evolved absent state and federal policy. It has always been a function of policy. I remember in the Inflation Reduction Act debate, Joe Manchin at one point said, I don't think we should be subsidizing electric vehicle charging stations because we didn't subsidize gas stations. And then someone looked in the code and the federal government did give tax breaks to gas stations. The energy infrastructure that we have had was incentivized.
Yeah. Yeah, we created this as our outcome, and now we need to create a different outcome. So, having said that, I think part of what we'll get into probably later is what are the best ways to do those subsidies. But one of the ways that we do those subsidies right now is through a REC, through a Renewable Energy Credit.
Then let me just ask, what is a REC?
Okay, let's do that. Okay. So I'm going to start with the basics of what a REC is, and then we're going to talk about different aspects of it. At its core, when energy is created from a renewable energy source, and let's just say wind for now, talk about land-based wind. When an energy is created from that, it creates the energy, the electrons that go on the grid, and then it creates, and this is something we've created from policy, it's something we've created in the marketplace, this idea of the renewable attribute, the fact that that electron that just got pushed onto the grid is a renewable electron. And so because we can't control where electrons go, they go on the grid and they go to the closest sort of use. What we have done, and I say we, but I actually wasn't around in the policy space when RECs were being created. But what was done was, like, we knew that we needed to direct some kind of recognition and some kind of money. Recognition, some kind of money to the source of clean energy. And so the decision was made that we would basically say, okay, you're going to put 1 megawatt of clean energy on the grid. You're going to get paid in credit for that 1 megawatt. You're going to sell that in the wholesale market where it will compete with the megawatt from coal, which has been subsidized. And then we are going to give you credit for the fact that you put a megawatt of clean energy on the grid. And so it's called unbundled in this case, because we are unbundling. You put the megawatt on the grid, and there's an unbundled recognition of the fact that you put a renewable energy component onto the grid. And so the REC is the Renewable Energy Credit. It's the renewable component of the energy that you put on the grid. And it can be bought and sold separate from the actual megawatt that you put on the grid, which is going to get bought and sold in some kind of a wholesale or forward market, depending on how you're participating.
So fundamentally, they're kind of just like certificates. You can imagine PJM giving every developer that generates a megawatt hour of clean electricity a little paper certificate that says, congratulations, you have created 1 megawatt hour of clean electricity, and you as the developer could then go and sell that to whoever you wanted to.
Yes. Yeah, but the important thing is that it's right now, for the most part, in the markets that we're working in, it's what we call an unbundled REC. It's disconnected from it's sold separately from the megawatt of electricity that got put on.
But if you own a solar panel or a solar field, you're generating income from selling the electricity, and you're also generating a separate revenue source of income from selling your renewable energy credits.
That's correct. That's correct. And here's why that matters. So let's just talk for a minute about why that matters. If we want people to build more wind and we want people to build more solar, and they're figuring out the math, how much is it going to cost me to put this solar in the ground? How much is it going to cost me to put this wind in the ground? And what are my revenue projections? Revenue projections for just the megawatts that you're putting on the grid are not generally going to be sufficient for you to build that, at least not in PJM. But adding the renewable energy credit makes the project what we call pencil, makes it work, makes that budget and revenue, the cost and revenue balance. And so now you'll go ahead and build that. And so the idea behind RECs, and I'm going to get in a few minutes to some of the criticism of RECs, but the idea behind RECs is that if we want more clean energy, and we know that the cost and the revenue from just the energy itself isn't going to get us to make that project pencil, we add RECs to the mix, and that's what's going to make that project pencil, and that's what's going to get developers to produce more clean energy.
So fundamentally, renewable energy credits allow more renewable energy to be built because it allows more projects to pencil that wouldn't have penciled without that additional revenue. To just summarize.
That is the theory.
That is the theory.
That is the theory.
Why we created this policy.
Yes.
Or I say we too. I was even less involved. But just to drill down to exactly how it works and the sort of life cycle of a REC from creation to retirement. So if you're a developer, you own solar panels, you get renewable energy credits that you then own, but you don't actually want them. They're useless to you until somebody pays for them. So who buys them from you? What happens to you? What happens to those RECs after you have developed them?
So this gets into what it means when Maryland says we're going to get to 50% clean energy by 2030. What it means is that our energy companies, so this is Pepco and BG&E and Potomac Edison, have to buy RECs that are the equivalent of 50% of the energy that their customers are using. So if their customers are using X number of megawatts a year, then they need to purchase X divided by 2 number of RECs per year to match the amount of energy that's being used. That's what we call 50% clean energy. That's what our current policy is. So that's one of the sources. So you see that our energy companies will buy RECs, and that's how we talk about the percentage of clean energy that we have in Maryland. And the reason, again, for that method is related to the actual energy that's flowing in and out of our grid and into our homes. You can't control where which electron kind of came into and onto the grid and where it came from. And so that's why we end up with this sort of, on paper, 50% clean energy, because the actual electrons flowing could be 75% clean energy in this location and 20% clean energy in that location, or 5% in that location. But the paper credits kind of let us ensure that a certain amount of money is going to develop new clean energy.
So if there's a wind turbine spinning in Pennsylvania and Maryland utilities purchase a REC from that wind turbine, there's no way in which that electron is making it to the state of Maryland. That electron from the wind turbine is going to go onto the grid and disperse to the nearest homes or whatever is nearby. But we still count its renewable energy generation in ours renewable energy portfolio standard because of that REC purchase.
That's correct. And I do want to spend some time talking about the PJM and the location of RECs, and I want to talk about that because I think that's really important. But before we go there, I just want to mention what else could happen with a REC. The other thing that can happen with a REC is that if you have a company that says, for example, if Google or Amazon or somebody says we're 100% clean energy, what that often means is they're buying RECs to match the energy that they're using, and so that's how they're getting to 100%.
So renewable energy credits exist in a private market outside of government policy.
Correct.
And so you can have a private developer selling to a private company like Google or Amazon or Microsoft, and Google, Amazon, or Microsoft are saying, we are getting 100% of our electricity from cleaner renewable sources, and they're doing that through the mechanism of purchasing renewable energy credits across the country.
That's correct.
And so then within that paradigm, utility companies are essentially one more customer for renewable energy credits from developers.
That's correct.
So the state of Maryland says, dear utility, you must buy these renewable energy credits. The utility then goes out and buys them from developers. And I want to get into how the alternative compliance payment fits into this dynamic. And so I want to ask, what happens if a utility fails to meet the goal that Maryland state law has set out for that utility in terms of REC procurement?
I don't think you want to think about it as a failure to meet the clean energy goal. I think the way that we've structured the policies is basically to say, okay, utilities, you need to buy 50% clean energy from these sources, or you need to buy 14.5% clean energy from solar with SRECs, which we're going to get to in a second. But with each of those, what we say is, here's the ceiling that we think is reasonable for you to pay for those RECs. When we say buy 50% clean energy, we're not saying at any price that's out there. What we actually do is we say, but each REC, the cap ought to be, and then we set a cap. That cap is called the alternative compliance payment. Because if the price of a REC goes above that cap, then what the utilities will do, instead of buying that REC, right, because they're going to get the cheapest RECs, instead of buying that REC, they're going to say, well, I don't need to buy that REC, I can just pay this alternative compliance payment instead. And so it serves both as a price cap for the RECs, and then it also serves as an alternative, right? So if the money goes into the alternative compliance payments instead of going to purchase the RECs, that goes into a different pot. In Maryland, it goes into the Strategic Energy Investment Fund, and it gets used to subsidize clean energy in other ways.
It's still kind of wild to me that RECs change their value so much that if you were to look at a graph of time on the x-axis and REC price on the y-axis, it would look like the price of a stock. Like they are essentially commodities.
Yes, it's a market. It's a market, right? So they're traded in the market, and RECs, I think they can last for 3 years. I may be wrong about that. Where you can hold on to your RECs for a couple of years, see what's happening to the price, and then sell your RECs. Once you sell it, that REC is retired. You can't, like if I sell you my REC, that REC has been counted, and you can't turn around and sell. It's not like we keep selling them like you might with a stock. But it is a marketplace, like your energy market or your capacity market or ancillary market. There is a marketplace for the RECs, and you're selling your RECs into a market.
And so fundamentally, what the Clean Energy Jobs Act of 2019 did to help clean energy is the REC prices were really low leading up to 2019, and so less wind and solar was being developed. We passed the Clean Energy Jobs Act of 2019, increased the requirements for purchasing RECs, and that caused the value of solar RECs and other RECs to go up. And when that value goes up, a bunch of projects that didn't pencil before suddenly penciled, and that's why we got more clean energy.
That's correct. Now, we should stop and back up, and we should talk about different kinds of RECs.
That's where I was going next. That's exactly where I was going.
This is where this becomes really important. So I think that there's a couple of things that folks need to also know about RECs. And I will say, I think they're a very imperfect tool. They're a tool that we have and that we're working with right now. And I think we need to use them as we develop other tools. People may agree or disagree. People who have similar values to mine may agree or disagree with this. But they're the tool we have, and so we need to work with them. But they're imperfect for a number of reasons, and I want to talk about them. The first thing that I want to talk about is just the location issue. So in Maryland, our rules for RECs, and to get to 50% clean energy, is that the RECs have to be produced in the PJM region. So PJM is the grid that Maryland exists in. It's 13 states, and it's essentially the PJM is the grid. The generators on that grid sort of all operate in a similar market. There's some coordination of transmission. There's coordination of sharing of generation, and PJM is the body that manages, sort of like air traffic controllers, manages moving energy around that system and runs a number of the markets and the auctions for energy and capacity and RECs. So because Maryland is a net importer of electricity, we bring in electricity, clean electricity, dirty electricity, we bring it in from other states. And so what that means is, if we were to change the mix of what we were producing only in Maryland, that wouldn't really be getting at, is the energy we're using 50% or is it 50% clean energy, because we're net importers. So the thought process...
So even if 100% of the electricity that was generated in Maryland was clean, we would still be using dirty energy because we import from Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Ohio, who all have coal and gas fleets.
That's correct. And so that's why this decision was made, that our RECs would be sort of legitimate if they were for clean energy somewhere in the PJM grid. So it could be in Maryland, right? So we have some wind farms on the western part of Maryland. It could be right over the border in Pennsylvania. It could be in West Virginia. But unfortunately, it could also be in Illinois. And I say unfortunately because this is when it gets to some of the concerns folks have about RECs and that I share. Again, starting by saying, like, this is kind of the tool we have. But there is this question of how do we really drive clean energy as much as possible in Maryland and as close to Maryland as possible. PJM is the container that we work with. It's sort of what we have for our state law, and we consider it legitimate right now. At the same time, and now I want to talk about some of the problems with some of the corporate purchasing of RECs and some of the third-party energy suppliers purchasing of RECs. Because in PJM, we're really struggling to get new clean energy on the grid. It's more expensive to put clean energy on the grid in PJM, and that's for a whole host of reasons. One of them is because of like the absolute failure of PJM to...
And let me just say, in case someone's wondering, PJM doesn't really stand for anything. If someone's wondering, like, keep using this acronym, what does the acronym mean? It really stood for like Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Maryland, but now just sort of refers to...
It is the grid operator.
Yeah.
It's the regional transmission
Just
operator.
for anyone who's like, when are they going to define that acronym? It's kind of like one of those acronyms that became just a proper noun.
That's right. Thank you.
Sorry to interrupt.
That's okay. That's all right. So, so it's more expensive to build clean energy in PJM for different reasons. One is because we have denser states in PJM, that like denser population. So we don't have like the Texas plains to put wind on, right? We have places to put wind, but not like the Midwest, not like parts of Texas, parts of the South.
A big part of developing renewable energy is buying the land to develop it on, and land here is just more expensive because it's denser.
Correct. And then partly just because of a number of failures at PJM, which has rules that are biased in favor of fossil fuels. That'll be we'll do that as another podcast.
We'll have a PJM podcast.
We'll do that
Look
as another
forward
podcast.
to that one.
But the reason that that's important is because wind in Texas, for example, would be able to get built and was built without subsidies. So if I were a Texas lawmaker, and the Texas lawmakers have wind getting built without subsidies, and so you don't need to necessarily subsidize. So we're thrilled that wind is getting built in Texas, but we don't need to subsidize the wind in Texas. That's getting built whether it gets subsidized or not, right? The market's working for wind in Texas for a whole host of reasons. Now here's the problem. When we look at a national market for RECs, Texas is allowed to sell RECs into that market even though those wind developers don't need that money to build those wind turbines. And so then what starts to happen, while Maryland says for our utilities you got to buy it within PJM, but you get these companies like third-party suppliers like NRG and others who say, we're going to sell you 100% clean energy, but the RECs they're selling you are coming from Texas, where it's not actually making a difference one way or the other if they get those RECs.
You being a utility customer.
You being a customer, you being anybody, you being an Amazon, you being Google, you being whoever, yes. And so this is where we get into the problem of greenwashing of energy supply, of third-party suppliers. And this year in the General Assembly, we made a lot of progress on this, which I won't get into right now, but I think it's really important to understand the difference between the RECs that we're requiring PEPCO and BG&E to buy and the RECs that some of these third-party suppliers are buying, which are sort of meaningless and not actually driving the clean energy market. They're not illegal. They're officially count nationally as RECs, but they're not actually driving new clean energy from being put on the grid.
And the example you shared was even still new wind being built, but they can get even more dramatic examples of like a dam in Washington state that has existed for 100 years and it's generating RECs. And like paying for RECs that dam generates doesn't help anyone in the clean energy transition. All it does is provide additional revenue to whichever company owns that dam. It's not causing anything new that's beneficial to be built.
That's correct. That's correct. And so that's why when we say RECs, that's why we're like halfway into this conversation. We're like half an hour in and we're like just going to get to some of these specifics. Like not all RECs are equal. Not all RECs are good. Not all uses of RECs are good. So it's part of why I'm saying like I think it's important. It's a tool that we have and we're using it right now and we need to improve that. But it's not, it's an imperfect tool. And so we have to be very careful about how we use it. And on that note, I really want to get to like trash incineration, poultry litter.
Yes.
If we can
So
kind of move on to that.
before we looked at the difference between like RECs that Maryland state requires our utilities to buy in the sort of general private sector, and the private it's a little more Wild West. We do have some definitions within Maryland, and within Maryland there's tier 1, there's tier 2, there's solar, and there's offshore wind, and they're all different. So let's go through them and start with just tier 1 RECs.
Okay, so tier 1 RECs has a whole bunch of stuff in it. I will say sort of the good stuff first. Tier 1 RECs includes land-based wind, and it includes small hydro. So that's, I think, 30 megawatts or less as a small, like a small dam.
And it also includes out-of-state solar.
And includes out-of-state solar. Yes, it does.
Those are the good things.
Those are good things. Then it includes bad things. And the bad things are trash incineration, which is probably the biggest, that's where the largest amount of sort of bad RECs go to. It includes trash incineration. It includes some poultry litter, biomass to energy, and it includes capture of methane in landfills. So I want to talk about incineration, which I think is the most egregious. It's where a huge number of RECs in the state go that got into the RPS, the Renewable Energy Portfolio Standard before I was here, so I was not here for that debate. And basically incineration is burning trash, and when you burn the trash, you create energy. There's debate about if incineration or landfill is preferable. They're both problematic. We need to do less of both, compost, recycle more. I'm not going to get into that because I feel like that is a waste management conversation. But as it relates to the renewable energy standards, burning trash is not renewable energy. And that's the bottom line. And so what we have done...
Like it includes plastic. And plastic is made of oil, and when you burn plastic, it's just like burning oil. It's literally a fossil fuel.
That's correct. And furthermore, burning trash and calling it renewable, by definition, renewable means we always have more of it, like the sun. And so to start burning trash and calling it renewable is saying we're going to completely fail at reducing trash. We're going to fail at, recycling and compost and all that. So furthermore, unlike solar and wind and other clean technologies, it also creates greenhouse gas emissions. It pollutes as does landfill, by the way, create greenhouse gas emissions. It pollutes the air and it causes huge health issues. It's a huge environmental justice issue. So this crazy idea that out of a pot of money that we've put aside to subsidize clean energy, we're subsidizing what is essentially a dirty energy, right? Pollutes the atmosphere and pollutes the climate, and ultimately is extending the life of, extending the profits of these dirty energy companies, incineration, is a huge mistake in the Maryland RPS. And so for a number of years, there's been several of us who have worked to clean up that RPS, and we'll continue to work to ensure that we take out these dirty energy sources, that what we keep in the RPS are real clean energy sources. So that's one piece about tier 1.
Yeah, and tier 1 basically, the way I think of it is the Clean Energy Jobs Act says, like, dear utilities, in 2030, take your total sales of electricity divided by 2, buy that many renewable energy credits from tier 1. But first, before you do that, subtract out in-state solar, that is part of the SRECs, and offshore wind. So that kind of remainder of the 50% after the in-state solar and offshore wind is what utilities have to buy RECs to cover.
Yes.
Is how I think of it.
You forgot about tier 2, but yes.
Yeah.
So we had tier 2 is where we have hydro, big hydro. So like Conowingo counts there.
And I think tier 2 technically gets us to 52%. Like I think that's over and on top of.
Okay. That might be true. Okay, so let's talk about SRECs. And then let's talk about ORECs, which actually aren't RECs at all. Everything we've described about RECs does not apply to ORECs. But let's start with SRECs because they are very similar. So because solar is sort of on a different development curve. I would say solar is on a different development curve than land-based wind and other things that are in tier one. It was determined that we needed to sort of separate out what solar was going to need in order to grow as an industry and as an energy source in Maryland. Furthermore, because solar is sort of more flexible in where it can be put, unlike a wind farm, for example. So we could put it on our roofs and on our carports and on our, fields and, as well as sort of the larger, utility scale solar. We can do more in Maryland. We can really drive Maryland-based production of energy with solar. And so the decision was to do that we wanted, and the number we have in law right now is 14.5%. And so the SRECs, the solar renewable energy credits, is a carve out, it's called, different from the tier one RECs I just described. And the SRECs go and only count if it's Maryland solar, basically. And so the idea is that they are a higher price than the tier one RECs. And so they give more revenue to develop and grow the amount of solar that we have in the state of Maryland. And that has the added bonus of adding resiliency to our grid because we really do need to produce more energy here in the state of Maryland. So that's the SRECs.
Mm-hmm. It's beautiful. We love SRECs.
We love SRECs.
This is great stuff.
We love SRECs. We love SRECs. And, and one of the things I'll say about SRECs, this is a bit of a side note, but the other thing, because again, it's driving Maryland solar, it also is tied to, for example, community solar, which gives a really equitable way of owning. Like anyone can own community solar. And so where we're talking about like, okay, we're subsidizing, we're growing this, and who's benefiting from that? What are the companies that are, making the money off of it? And we always should be asking questions about corporate profits when we're having conversations about subsidy and what are we growing and whose influence and whatever. But one of the beautiful things about solar and growing solar in the state is that we do have one piece of it is community solar that has this real equitable framework for ownership. And so if anyone's listening to this and doesn't own their piece of community solar, go get one.
Yeah. If you can't put solar on your roof for any
or even
reason
if you can.
Or even if you can, you can
own community solar.
You can
own a piece of community solar. Yeah.
And one of the things I appreciate most about the SREC being in state for Maryland is that, as you mentioned, Maryland imports a lot of electricity. And so for every additional solar megawatt hour of solar that we generate is one fewer that we import. And so then instead of sending our dollars out of state, the dollars that Maryland ratepayers pay will go to someone in Maryland. And those dollars can stay in state.
Yes, and we are going to talk a little bit about ratepayers and taxpayers and subsidies, I think.
We're going to talk about a lot of things.
Okay, we're going to get to that.
So that's SRECs, pretty simple. They're like tier one RECs, except it's just solar that's in state.
Yes.
So next we get to offshore wind renewable energy credits, ORECs, which apparently are not RECs.
They're not RECs.
So okay. What are they?
So in order to talk about ORECs, I actually have to talk about power purchase agreements.
Which is
long-term contracts.
We were going to talk about it.
We were going to talk about it anyway, so now we're going to talk about it. And I will say, I think I think later we're going to talk about alternatives, but I'll just I'll do a teaser right now and say, power purchase agreements, long-term contracts, I think are a really important tool in how we do renewable energy development, and actually we need to do more of that. I personally think they're preferable to RECs. RECs is the structure we're working in right now, so we've got to kind of work from it. But long-term contracts, I think, are actually preferable to RECs.
I feel myself wanting to say all those reasons of why they're better, but we're going to hold off on that.
Okay. So we'll talk about why they're better later, but what a power purchase agreement does is it says to the developer, okay, you're going to build, in this case, we're talking about offshore wind, you're going to build offshore wind, and we are going to guarantee, we're going to sign a 20-year contract that we are going to pay $56 for each megawatt hour for the next 20 years, and maybe with some inflation calculator in there, for the next 20 years. And with that guarantee that you're going to be able to sell, the offshore wind developer is going to be able to sell $56 per megawatt hour for the next 20 years, they can take that as a guaranteed income source, a guaranteed revenue source, and they can take it to the capital markets and they can take it to their lenders and whoever else they're pulling the capital together for their projects. They can build that project that doesn't have revenue for the first while they're building it, and then they begin to receive that revenue once they start producing electricity, and off they go.
And fundamentally, RECs are not a contract. You
RECs
sell
are not a
RECs on like you just show up at the market, you sell it for whatever
Say, this
the
is what I
price
got.
is.
Here's a REC. What price is available for this REC? And so it's less predictable. Power purchase agreement, long-term contract is more predictable. So with when we developed ORECs, again, this was before my time, so I don't know who thought it would be a good idea to call them ORECs. I feel like it has confused generations of elected officials and activists and even developers. Like everyone who talks about it doesn't actually, people are like, well, they're RECs. I'm like, oh, they're not actually RECs. Okay, so the way it works is the Public Service Commission, who we haven't actually talked about yet, basically manages a process where the developers, offshore wind developers, come to them and they say, here's our proposal, $56 a megawatt hour, or whatever the number is, $72. The Public Service Commission goes through the whole thing, says, yes, that's reasonable, no, it's not reasonable, accepts the contract, makes the guarantee to the developer, so now they can build, and then the difference between the price that is guaranteed to the developer and the price of energy in any of those 20 years is either subsidized or it's returned to Maryland ratepayers. So like RECs, which are paid by Maryland ratepayers, ORECs are also paid by Maryland ratepayers. It's just a somewhat different structure. And here's what I mean by that. If $56 a megawatt hour were the 20-year contract, let's say in the first few years where the energy markets are clearing at $40 a megawatt hour, Maryland ratepayers would be paying the difference, the $16 a megawatt hour to the developers. That would be a subsidy. But let's say now there's a war in Europe and natural gas prices change and all these things change. And now 5 years into the contract, energy is $60 a megawatt hour. We're still in a contract with that developer for $56 a megawatt hour. And so that means this savings of $4 a megawatt hour gets passed on to ratepayers. And that is a really important distinction between sort of long-term contracts / ORECs, which is how those are structured, and SRECs and Tier 1 RECs and all the other RECs that we talk about, where you have a market, the price goes up and down, you might be paying more at any given time for an SREC or less, but never more than the alternative compliance payment, that ceiling. But with the ORECs, because they're a long-term contract, there's a fixed price that's paid, and you're either subsidizing or receiving the benefit depending on what's happening in the energy market.
From the perspective of the offshore wind developer, the ORECs mean that they have a contract that their offshore wind will be purchased at a certain price point for the duration of the contract.
And the utility is going to collect the money that gets passed along to them for that, yes.
Mm-hmm. And then what the ORECs are essentially doing is closing the gap between that guaranteed price to the developer and whatever the price of electricity is.
That's correct.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like a REC. That sounds
It's not
like
a
a
REC.
totally different.
It's not
it
a
sounds
REC.
like a power purchase agreement.
I don't know why we call them RECs. It's a real problem, though. So
the last bucket to go through is just Tier 2 RECs, and then I think we'll talk about ways that the system can be improved overall. But I think Tier 2 RECs, as my understanding, was originally developed to be like, we were going to have the best, and then the second best was going to be in Tier 2, and Tier 2 was going to phase out. As Tier 2 was phasing out, a few things happened. One, trash incineration was originally in Tier 2 at the inception of the policy, and then under the O'Malley administration, it jumped over to Tier 1 because they wanted to get off the sinking ship before Tier 2 was phased out. And then also Tier 2 included large hydro, and the large hydro advocate said, well, what if we just keep Tier 2 around at a small percentage in perpetuity? And that's essentially what became of it. So it's basically just large hydro, is my understanding.
And that's what's left in there, yeah. Yeah.
So we have all these policies and then a little Tier 2 large hydro hanging out there on top.
Yeah.
Those are the buckets. We've gone through a lot. This is a lot of content. I've learned a lot. Hopefully you've learned a lot. And now I just want to kind of close on, we've talked a lot about how this is an imperfect mechanism for achieving our ultimate goal, which is getting ourselves off of fossil fuels and eliminating our greenhouse gas emissions so that we can have a cleaner air, more affordable energy, and a safer climate. Like that is the goal, is building more wind and solar and clean energy, renewable batteries, all the things that we want. And this is an imperfect mechanism to that end. And I want to just invite you to reflect more on why it's imperfect and what better mechanisms we could use.
Yeah. So I think the first reason that it's imperfect is because it's designed as a cost to ratepayers. And so if you go back to when I was talking at the beginning about all the ways that we have subsidized fossil fuels, the direct subsidies, indemnification, the access to state lands, access to federal lands, all of those are costs that are borne sort of on the taxpayer side of the I don't know, on the borne on taxpayers. All of those are costs that are borne on taxpayers. Now you might say in RECs, the way we collect the RECs, the way we pay the RECs is it's paid for by ratepayers, electric ratepayers. Now you might say, well, taxpayers and ratepayers are all the same people, and that's sort of true, except electric rates are very regressive, that you have lower income people who might have no tax liability, who might not pay tax at all, or might even get, primarily get refunds, might even get the earned income tax credit, still have to pay electric bills. And so as much as I am fighting for and want taxes to be way more progressive than they are, they're still way more progressive than rates are. Mm-hmm. And in particular, very low income individuals who receive, earned income tax credit pay some of the highest in energy charges, and they have an energy burden, it's called, way above what it should be, because they may live in homes that aren't sufficiently insulated, because they have, the lack of an ability to have the most efficient appliances in the homes, because not having enough cash to purchase new appliances. And for all those reasons, people are paying very high electricity bills. And so when we put the subsidies on electric bills as opposed to on tax bills, we inevitably make the way that we're building this clean energy future less equitable than it could be. So I have, for years, and continue to try to find ways to continue recognizing that we need to find these subsidies, these ways to close the gap, to find ways to do that on the tax side of the ledger as opposed to the rate side of the ledger. So I would say fundamentally that is one of the biggest sort of criticisms that I have of RECs.
And that's part of what we did with the Power Act, is shift that
Yes.
offshore wind purchasing power to the taxpayer as opposed to the ratepayer.
That's correct. The second thing that is imperfect about RECs is, if you remember, I talked earlier about this idea of them being unbundled. But also, we talked a little bit about whether RECs are going to build and bring new clean energy on, or whether something that would have been built anyways is getting RECs. Now, some people argue, well, it would have been built anyways, but now we're able to extend the life of it, or do upgrades to it. That may or may not be true. But it's true that right now there are projects being built that need the RECs, and if they don't have the RECs, they are not going to get built. And so for that reason, that's sort of this tool we have in the toolbox, and we sort of keep going with it. But it's also true that there are projects that were built, we're penciling, we're just fine, and now can get RECs.
Or that were built decades ago. I mean, this is what I think one of the weakest points of the REC system is that, Tier 1, in addition to having a bunch of dirty stuff in it, has a bunch of stuff that was built a really long time ago. Like both of the trash incinerators in Maryland that get renewable energy credits were built and were operating and were profitable before the renewable portfolio standard was ever created. So in that instance, we're not helping anything new be built. Like obviously we don't want new trash incinerators to be built, but all we're essentially doing is taking ratepayer money and funneling it to these existing facilities so the shareholders that own those facilities can have a financial bump. Yeah. We're not changing anything about the physical world. We are just changing that financial flow to existing facilities, some of which we don't even want to exist.
True. So it's complicated. So, we have, right now we do have, and I've spent a lot of time in conversations with renewable energy developers. And I've talked about like what would be better, what do we need, what would be better, what could we do. And I think that these long-term contracts are a preferable model.
Which are the same thing as power purchase agreements.
Power purchase agreements, long-term contracts, yes.
The same thing.
And the reason for that is that one is if we sign a long-term contract right now, we are going to be sure that that contract is bringing new energy online. But the other thing is what the long-term contract does is it also creates, one of the tricky things about RECs is we have to set policy for multiple years. And, as you were talking about before, if you look at a graph of REC prices, it goes up and down. And so even developers are sort of trying to hedge, risk and make decisions and, and RECs, which are crucial right now to how they pencil projects, aren't necessarily guaranteed to be at certain prices. And so they add an additional element of risk to the mix. Whereas a power purchase agreement, one, it ensures that we're bringing on new clean energy. Two, it essentially takes the risk away because it's creating a guaranteed set of revenue, a guaranteed projection of revenue. And three, the interesting thing that I think it does, and this is where it's beneficial to the state or to ratepayers or to the folks who are, the policymakers, those of us who are saying we're going to sign this contract, is especially with clean energy, I think we generally can expect that electricity prices are going to go up and up and up and up and up, right? And so with a long-term contract, while we don't know, and there's a bunch of things you can't predict about what energy prices are going to look like in 10 years, with a long-term contract, you're actually locking in a specific price. That is a benefit to the developer, but it also has a benefit to the purchaser of that electricity because there's a good chance that 10 years from now, depending on what that price is, it's going to be a really good deal, and we've still locked in that really good deal for ourselves.
You're sort of betting that energy prices will go up, and we have about half a century of data to suggest that.
That's true, with a couple of exceptions here and there, but yeah. And here's the thing about also about long-term contracts and financing clean energy projects. Clean energy, and this is where there is very different from fossil fuels in that the biggest cost for clean energy is the upfront capital. Like once you put, it's the sunk costs, it's the fixed costs. Once you put those wind turbines in, yes, there's some maintenance and there's some additional costs that go forward, but for the most part, the wind is free. The solar is free.
Nobody's figured out how to own the sun yet.
I hope I'm not around when they do. The marginal cost of creating that energy is very close to zero. And so once you have built it, from a developer perspective, there's going to be some maintenance costs and whatnot, but it's not like suddenly your inputs are going to increase substantially and all of a sudden you have to turn around and renegotiate that contract.
A land war in Asia
right?
is not going to make the cost of sunshine go up.
That's exactly right. And so you're not going to be renegotiating those contracts. You're not going to be, and so it actually creates, long-term contracts create a level of stability for the purchaser of the contract, for the the off-taker of the energy, as well as for the developer. And so,
I think this is so crucial that we, like the state of Maryland, could provide greater value to solar developers at a lower cost to ratepayers just by taking the risk out.
Yes,
by saying
that's my sense. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. When I would talk to developers, that's what they tell me is that almost any business would rather take a sure thing than a slightly better risky thing. And if a solar developer goes to a bank and says, we're going to get this much electricity and this is how much SRECs are, the bank says, well, that SREC value could collapse tomorrow. Like, we can't count on that, so we're going to give you a high interest loan. You're going to have to pay for it in all these ways.
That's right.
And so we can lower the cost for everyone, provide fewer Maryland subsidies, and still get more solar built through moving towards this power purchase agreement approach.
Yeah.
I just love that. It's a win-win-win policy that keeps prices, also puts downward pressure on that steady upward trend of energy prices
Yeah.
by locking them in the long term.
Yeah, the other thing that power purchase agreements does, and this is what we did in the Power Act, is it creates a couple of different, it creates an opportunity to shift the subsidy from and the risk from being on ratepayers to being on taxpayers. And so what we did with the Power Act is, instead of having the PSC negotiate with the offshore wind developer and come up with whatever that price is, $56, $72, and then say whatever the difference is, the ratepayers are either going to pay or benefit from. Instead, we said it's going to be the state that's going to negotiate that price and get whatever that price is, $50, $100, $75 a megawatt hour, and the state is going to pay the difference, or the state is going to get the benefit from that difference. And that is taxpayers who are paying it. So that is a more just, more equitable way to subsidize, to be sure that we're getting that offshore wind, crucial to getting to 100% clean energy, which we haven't started talking about, but offshore wind is crucial to that. And it's we can do it in a more equitable way.
That takes me through everything I was hoping we would talk about. Is there anything else that you want to say on the subject of RECs before we wrap up?
I'll think of something like at 3 o'clock in the morning when I can't sleep. But no,
I
right
should
now,
have said.
Yeah, that's
Well,
it.
hopefully this will be the first of multiple conversations where we'll be explaining Maryland energy policy. And this has been a lot of fun.
Yes.
Thank you,
Thank
Delegate,
you.
for talking with me about these topics.
My pleasure.
All right. Bye, everyone.